Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. I'm a psychological astrologer and I'm delighted because today I have Wendy Stacey with me to talk about astrocartography. Welcome, Wendy.
Hi, and thanks for having me on here. Thank you.
Well, I saw that you were doing a course for the Astrological Lodge of London, and I was a little bit too late to get you in ahead of that. But here you are, having just finished it. So, so I think you know what, to begin with, it would be nice to get a sense of what astrocartography means to you.
Well, I find it as a really good tool to use both natally and mundane, and in forecasting. Just a really good tool to look at where things, arrive, where things happen. I find it fascinating, actually. It's incredibly insightful. So I've increasingly used it over the years. And yeah, it's just so informative on, for the natal chart, you can see where you want to be, where you like, what food you might like, what friends you may have, partners, things like that, and where you might not like, and similar with mundane, it's where things may happen. Looking at whether it's ingresses, eclipses, lunations, or cycles, or whatever, national charts, leaders charts, things like that. You can see where things may develop, both challenging and positive. It's just so, informative and educational, really.
So I think you're probably only the second person I've had on Lightways talking about astrocartography. I had the pleasure of speaking with Aaron Sullivan about this.
Oh, wonderful.
Maybe about a year ago. So for those who are new to Lightways and to astrocartography, can you explain how it works, please?
Yeah, so what you're doing is you're looking at a chart and then you're putting it on the world map. And what you're looking at is basically where the planets fall on the midheaven and IC axis, and also the ascendant descendant. And when you look at a chart, so say for example your own birth chart, you put it on the world map, and so you look at where anywhere in the world those planets would be angular. So you may put your chart up and you may have Mercury on the ascendant going through London, but you may have Jupiter on the midheaven going through Houston, something like that. So that would indicate that your relationship with Houston is a Jupiter on the midheaven one. And sometimes we look at parans as well, which sort of defy the normal aspects we use in everyday astrology. So because it depends on the location and the time where someone may be. So you may not have Mercury square, I don't know, say for example Uranus in your chart, but there'll be somewhere on the planet where those two planets become angular, for example. So it's really quite interesting, when that happens. So you're looking at the crossover, the parans of where these planets fall. So what it does is it tells you where in the world those planets become on those axes for you, and it tells a story of what it may mean. I mean, for example, if you're wanting to get published, or you're looking for a client base, or whatever you do, it can be really helpful looking in the world where that may come from. For example, I have a line going through Hawaii, and I'm constantly doing babies charts from written handmade gifts for babies charts, things like that. And you realize why when you look at the world map, why there, so yeah, it's fun. It's actually really fun to use. Yeah.
So the one that people always get frustrated by is where they have this beautiful line going right through the Pacific, or right down the Atlantic. Nowhere. What do you say about that?
Well, there's a funny story, like my Venus runs through East Africa, and pretty much the rest of it through the ocean. And it's quite funny because my husband, he's Indian, but he was born in East Africa. But most of my Venus is in the ocean, and I'm married to a stellium and Pisces in the 12th house. So there you go.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Not that that necessarily is, I mean, it's more, you know, comical.
Well, you know, I don't know, because I find that my feeling is that if we don't go to the place comes to us by virtue of people. So it's the relationship we have from that part of the world is colored by a line that goes through that part of the world. And that staggers me every time. I never cease to be amazed by how that happens.
And exactly, and you'll find friends, and you know, like people, they may never go to Afghanistan, but you'll find that they work and have a really close relationship with someone from there. Or my favorite is looking at the moon, for example, and how people love the food for where their moon, you know, their moon lines run through. So, you know, the food might, you know, they may live in Germany, but their moon line goes through Mexico. So, and it's fascinating. Their favorite food ends up being Mexican. Things like that. You know, there's just, it's fascinating how, you know, that works, you know, and it does work.
That's made me laugh because I happen to have the moon on the IC running through Crete.
Great.
Yeah. And it's the only place where I bought a cookbook.
Oh, how funny is that? Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. That's the sort of thing you know, you find. So it's really fun, you know, working with it in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it was when you said, when I think about it, I am a Taurus. I have a vast collection of books, but I don't tend to buy them when I'm on holiday.
Yeah.
If I'm traveling, I don't tend to buy a cookbook from every place I go to. But there I was in Crete, and I thought, I think I'd really like to get a cookbook with Cretan cooking, and there it is.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Yeah, that's great. That's really cool. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the sort of thing you find with astrocartography. It's just so fun to play with. Yeah.
Well, I think that when you start looking at it from your personal experience, it really comes to life. And again, it's people coming to us. So I didn't meet my partner here. We met, neither of us, in our native countries. Neither of us did. So you could say, well, I've got Venus in the 9th, he's got Venus in Sagittarius. You might expect that. But here's the thing. I have Mercury on my MC running exactly through his place of birth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is what you were talking about with your husband.
Yeah. Yeah. And my husband's Venus runs right through my hometown at the bottom of New Zealand. Like it's right at the bottom of New Zealand, you know, and that it goes straight through there. Not to say that, you know, I'm not saying it's amazing how it does pick up, you know, like, you know, we were looking at the other night at, you know, Harry and Meghan's charts, for example, and Harry's Venus runs straight through California. Her Mercury is on the midheaven in London, and of course, you know, it's become something else. It's about the press and things like that. So, you know, there is a story, you know, I mean, I think there's a lot more to astrocartography that we haven't sort of drilled down yet, because we're just playing with it. And I'm sure, you know, Robert Zoller and, you know, who used to do his course on it, I think those who studied with him, and there's quite a few. I think I remember Claire Chandler, ex-president of the lodge, I think she studied with Zoller. And you know, I think, you know, he probably did some pretty great work with astrocartography. But, you know, now computers are just making it so easy, and it's only going to develop. I mean, I'm not sure who's going to develop it, but someone will. And yeah, because you can do a lot of things with it, you know, without even getting, you know, then you can get into aspects and things like that. So there is a lot of things, but there's just so much, a bit like the natal chart. It's you could talk about it forever. There's a lot in it. And it's the same with looking at it, you know, on the world map. I mean, one of the most interesting things for me was looking at the ingresses, the solar ingresses of the equinoxes and solstices, and looking at the volcanoes that were where the Mars line ran through. You know, we were following La Palma and the Canaries right at the spring equinox. Then it ended 3 months later, and then the next Mars ingress was the volcano near Tonga and Hawaii, and all these Mars lines. It's really interesting. And you know, so I did a sort of research back on these volcanoes when they last erupted and did the ingress that preceded that. And yeah, again, you find that's what you find. You find the Mars line running through that. So it's, you know, fascinating when you get your teeth into it and, you know, start to do some research on it. Yeah, fascinating.
Tell us about transits that happen to our angles and how that might influence the area where they're happening.
Yeah, well, so for example, you've got Mercury on your midheaven where your partner's from. And so say you know, you have a I don't know, Jupiter transit to your Mercury, then, you know, it's going to be accentuated in some way. It's going to be exaggerated in some way. You know, you may travel back there at that time, or he might, you know, may not be you, it may be him. And so, you know, but it's but there'll be some, you know, connection to there, that his particular birthplace will be you know, will be under the radar, or his family is going to come and stay with you, or something like that. You know, it's going to be a topic. It's going to be, you know, something that people are going to, you know, that you guys are going to be involved with at that time. So it's, yeah. So transits, and whatever transit, and you know, if it was a Pluto transit on your Mercury, it may be that you don't want to go there at that time, or you can't get there. There's something, you know, or something, you know, that's more Pluto than so yeah. And I mean, but you know, it's very good for solar returns. Lee Lehman quotes Ray Merriman when she says that he suggested, she attributes Ray for having bringing magic into our world. For if you know, go to your solar return, you know, when that solar return where the sun is, then, you know, you can change your year. She says it's magical. She doesn't encourage people to do it every year because it is so magical that, you know, you sort of, but I know astrologers that do that. They chase their solar return and go to places on the planet where that's happening. So they spend their whole solar return there, and it has an impact on the rest of the year. So that's quite interesting.
So when you say go to where the sun is on the solar return,
Yeah, on the midheaven.
On the midheaven?
Yeah. I mean, you could go on the ascendant or something like that as well. But I think, you know, most people are chasing that sun on the midheaven, if that's, and you know, looking, because they're looking for that experience, you know, that sort of experience. So yeah, and I know people who, you know, actually come and stay with me because of their, yeah, they want their solar return, yeah, to be at that location. So you can relocate your solar return. You know, you can't relocate your natal. Your natal is what it is. Doesn't matter where you're born. It's going to be that at that same moment in time. But your solar return can be quite different.
It's funny because there are different views on the relocation of solar returns. I know that when I was doing Anthony Lewis about solar returns, he was talking about how even if you're living in a place, the birth solar return, the solar return for the birthplace remains of paramount importance. But I like the idea of just for the fun of it.
Yeah, playing with it, exactly. Yeah,
playing it and thinking, well, where is the sun going to be on the midheaven this year? Let's see if I can plan a holiday there, and that would be fun.
yeah, and you can also change that. You know, you can change it. I mean, if you start thinking about it, I mean, when I was talking to Lee Lehman about this, I was actually interviewing her on medical astrology. So, you know, and we talk, you know, there are patterns to solar returns. You know, there's so many years that you're going to have this and that, and so many years you're going to have this sign on you know, the sixth house, for example. So, you know, so the ruler of that, you know, is going to have an effect on health. So, you know, you could look at it from that perspective as well, saying, okay, you know, this is what I want to do for my health this year. Maybe, you know, I mean, I agree too. The natal and the natal solar return is primary. Absolutely. It's something that relocated solar return would definitely be secondary too. But like you say, it's fun. It's just, you know, it can be something you can just play with. And
Well,
yeah.
I think there's something else here too, and that is that when you choose to relocate your solar return, you're setting an intention for what you want in the coming year.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is really important, because when you're setting that intention, you're putting forward in motion your energy to move in that direction.
Yeah.
And inviting then other energy to come and work with you. So I think that that's actually quite important in its
Yeah.
own.
It's quite powerful, isn't it, when you think about it? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's, yes, you're always going to be who you are. Therefore, your natal charts and your natal, the solar return to the natal is always going to be of primary importance, because you are, and we, you know, however much we might want to run away from things, we always have to come along on holiday with us. So
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
avoid that.
Excess luggage. Exactly.
So the chart is always going to, the natal chart is always going to be the natal chart. But
Yeah.
having said that, I think when you are setting an intention, that's also extremely powerful, because it means that you want to move in that direction. And if you are looking at your astrocartography and you're free to relocate for your solar return, then that's a very powerful way to set that intention and make it more tangible.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It is. Yeah. It's very powerful. It's very powerful when you know, yeah, make that decision to do something. It's defining. It's quite defining. And yeah. And you know, using that, you know, having that sort of agency, I guess, in astrology when you've got these things going on, yeah, is can be quite profound as well, you know. I do like what Lee says about don't you know, don't do it too much because you're working with magic, you know. So I like her caution in that respect. She's, you know, because it sort of is like that, and it's sort of like it's got to be meaningful as well, rather than just a birthday wish. Yeah,
exactly. And that's always the way. It's like
yeah,
story chart, you
yeah,
do, and there are rules as to how to ask the question, and as to what kind of a question you have to ask. You know, it's got to be something that is
very
burning,
good comparison. Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's, and that is magic, because gosh, you know, the other day I was asking a question, there was really something on my mind, and I couldn't believe it when I cast the chart for that question. It was my ascendant, it was on the degree of my ascendant. It
wow,
was
cool,
that junction. And I thought, this really is on my importance to me, isn't it?
brilliant. Yeah, but it's the same thing. You don't cast, you know, horrors every day. You don't, you know, you don't do it all the time. So yeah, it's an important point. Yeah, and it's the same one. Yeah, yeah.
I think there is something else that's useful for, in terms of solar returns and transits, of course, which would be places to avoid at certain, because if you're going through a Pluto square to your ICMC, that might not be the best time to be on that line.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be intense enough. And if you go there, what will happen? I think it's one of those where I'd rather not find out.
I had clients once, which were a couple who they met on a Pluto line. They didn't meet in their hometowns. They met there. They instantly fell in love. It was a Pluto connection, but they really hated the place they were at, both of them. And they said they'd never return. And I remember thinking at the time, I'll never forget that, you know, they both really did not like the place, somewhere in Europe. One of them was American, one of them wasn't, and they met under, you know, on both of their Pluto lines on that place. So they were both there. It was sort of, you know, and of course, I'm sure they had a very Plutonic, you know, intimate you know, finding each other. But yeah, the place itself, location itself. So that's an interesting, both, you know, different faces of Pluto that they met while they were at that location. Quite interesting. Yeah.
That makes me think of the most narrow escape we've ever had on a road. We very narrowly avoided an accident that was, it was not caused by us. We would have been caught up in it and just narrowly avoided being caught up in it. And my partner was going through a Pluto transit, and it was a Pluto line.
Yeah, so it's often, you know, yeah, exactly. It's often about, you know, survival, and it's something you'll remember forever. Yeah. I've had, you know, and sometimes people don't escape it. I've seen that too, and that's not pleasant. So, you know, it is, you know, not to say that, you know, I'm not superstitious. I'm not really the superstitious type, so I'm not gonna, you know, not go somewhere. I mean, I went to UAC in 2018, and my Mars and Cancer line goes straight through Chicago. And, you know, I was in a hospital twice. Well, when I say in the hospital, it wasn't, you know, I had an infection on my finger. It's funny because my friend Sue was with me, Sue Tompkins was with me, and she had to come to hospital with me, and cancer is like Rawls's finger or something like that, and something, you know, cancer is about this finger, and Mars had this infection. All it needed was a prick. All it needed was, you know, but, you know, I was called Wendy the Finger at UAC in 2018, and I just had this, people were really scared I was going to get my arm amputated and things like that, because I was prepared to do it myself. I mean, it was just so ridiculous. But, you know, $5,000 later, $5,000. Fortunately, I had medical insurance. But again, Pluto, not Pluto, Mars and infection, you know, and had to be pricked twice, like a Mars, you know, cancer does.
And it was inflamed and an infection. And
yeah, just need to be popped, but, you know, costs a lot of money. But so, you know, you can, and when I go to that line in America, I can never sleep, but it's not going to stop me going there. I'm not superstitious, you know. It's you know, we would, when you see the recording from the lodge, you know, someone's about to travel on their Mars line, but their Mars is in Sag, and it's like, well, you know, jump in a buggy and go horse riding, do whatever, you know, one day, you know, it's not necessarily, because, you know, it's also, there's always different ways you can look at
there are,
and I'm not superstitious like that.
And that's why I was talking about timing. You know, there are times when you could have a great time on that line, and then there are times when it might not be so good. And I think it also depends on the relationship between, and you were talking about, you know, the parents, and it's there perhaps where the heart of the volcano, shall we say, lies. And so it might be that's the place where it could be most dodgy if you're going through a difficult transit. Or
so yes, if you've got that particular planet being triggered by progressions, transits, even solar arcs, then it could be it's like be prepared, I think.
Exactly.
But if it, you know, but if you hold hands with that planet, or, you know, and you've had these transits before and they were okay, you know, then sort of you know, it can be fine. It can be fine. I mean, I wouldn't warn someone not to do something.
No, it also depends on the condition of the planet natally. So if you have a beautifully aspected Pluto, and Pluto works well with you, then that's probably fine. but equally, if you have a bit of a dodgy Venus,
yeah, then
that line that seems to be heralding wonderful things for everybody else, for you might be a line where you overindulge, where you get yourself into social mishaps.
lose your luggage, lose your money, you know, your
Exactly.
money, your bank card doesn't work, things like that. Yeah, absolutely. It can be can be merely an inconvenience. But you know what? It's so funny, Anna. You know, as astrologers, we, you know, it's a sense of humor develops more and more when we realize these things happen, and there's, you know, nothing you can do about it. And it's, yeah, and there's sort of always going to be something that would have taken you there anyway in the first place. I mean, you can look at it from many different points of view and say, well, what are you working through? You know, that sort of thing as well. Because why did you go there in the first place? And why then? Why now? All that sort of stuff. I mean, I haven't really gone there with that sort of work, but you know, it is an interesting one.
Is, and I think
Yeah.
that that's always what it comes down to. So why is this happening? What am I learning from it? Because it's not like, I'm not so egocentric as to believe that all the gods are sat down together to create this for my
Yes.
so
Yes.
what is
Yeah.
it that I'm to learn from this? And that's the stuff of life. It is the stuff of life.
Yeah.
Things do happen. And some of them we enjoy, some of them we would really rather forget. But
Yeah.
to forget the waste. So let's deal with it. Let's find out
Yeah.
what
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
and then grow and find that that's one less demon sitting in the cupboard that we don't know about.
That's a great way to put it. Well, there's always going to be one of those, isn't there? Somewhere,
I mean,
somewhere.
we
Just
come
when you're not, just when you don't expect it. Yeah.
yeah,
And
we
in a different location. Yeah.
exactly come equipped with these, they hide under our bed, they sit in our cupboards, and we
Yeah.
wonder why things are going awry, and there they are laughing between themselves. And the more we get them out and stop pretending they're not there, then the better it is, because we're more and more free to be the people that we want to be. So it's wonderful, because the nature of my work is always dealing with that.
Yeah.
My therapist hat on and my psychological astrology hat on. That's always what I'm aiming to do. And I love that astrocartography is yet another that can be shed to help us to see that, because it's not just about places, it's about the people that come from the places as well.
Yeah. It's about, and as we become more global, which is inevitable, we can't go back on, it's only going to speed up, globalization. And as those barriers come down, nationally and socially and all that, and economically, all that sort of stuff, we're going to find that this sort of thing is going to become very popular, I think. Like, for example, I mean, 5 years ago, I would never have a client ask me, they might ask me about some place or whatever, but not, I mean, I have progressively been sharing my screen and showing the chart, because that's what they want. That's actually what, some clients want. And it's quite interesting. And I've realized how much more I'm using it in client work, where I never, even like 5 years ago when astrocartography was still around, but not as much, people didn't want it as much. But now, it's people think, I guess, more about relocating. They think more, I mean, permanently or temporary, temporarily or something like that. But so it's become, something that more of interest, and people who are astrologers, or also that don't know anything about astrology, ask questions about locations on the earth. So it's an interesting tool.
So we're talking a lot about relocation, and I guess we ought to be careful, because some people are going to be thinking about relocation charts.
Oh no, people always do, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I live in London. I have Chiron, coming through Chiron, you know, and I've lived here for what, 27, 28 years now. But you know, I have Chiron rising in my natal chart, so it's, you know, I hold hands with Chiron. It's not a, you know, and you know, really, yeah, I love working with Chiron and have done quite a lot. So it's interesting that, yeah, that's what I have running through London, not anything, you know, not Jupiter or the Sun or Mercury, Venus, anything like that. No, Chiron. So that's interesting. And that's clearly, you know, I've been here for 28 years now. So it's not like, you know, I don't feel like my journey here is chironic. I mean, it is on many levels in terms of work and my own life in some ways, but not in a lovely way, in a positive way. Yeah.
That's made me think a lot. So
Yes.
I had one question, now I've got 10. Let's just backtrack a little bit, because I think we ought to explain the difference between a relocation chart and an astrocartography chart.
Right. So, well, I mean, if you look at your natal chart on the world map, so for example, I mean, I don't live in my own country, New Zealand. So if I put my own natal chart on astrocartography, you can see where everything is, you know, in the world map. Now, if you were, you know, but it doesn't matter if you were born at anywhere at that point in time, you'd still have the same ACG map. You'd still have the same one. So it doesn't matter. But of course, if you relocate your chart, so you know, you can, so that by that ACG map, you can look at where you may want to relocate your chart to. So for example, if you have Jupiter on the midheaven in Toronto in Canada, and you relocate your birth chart to Toronto, Canada, so it's going to give you a different time, it's going to give you a different ascendant and all that. But it means that Jupiter will be on the midheaven because that's where you've relocated it to. So they are different, but you can use ACG to look at where to relocate to. So, you know, and you know, like I you know, I know a journalist whose lines go through the Middle East. And, you know, so you reset her chart for the Middle East, and she'll have all these really interesting lines, and they're not Venus and Jupiter, you know, running through the Middle East. And she's, you know, it's the nature of what she's reporting on. So we sort of live it anyway, whether we relocate or not, we're still sort of living it. And that's the point, I guess. We don't need to relocate our charts. That's what the ACG sort of does.
But if we are moving to a specific location, we're moving for work reasons, we meet someone, we're moving there, and we want to get a sense of what that place means for us. We can look at the astrocartography chart, but we can also do a relocation chart, which means that what we're doing is we're changing the place of birth.
Yeah. So the planets and houses will be different, and
exactly,
and the ascendant will be different, and things like that. But yeah.
And that's important because that gives you more information about how that place is going to interact with you, how you are going to interact with that place, the areas of life which perhaps might not have been so highlighted in the natal chart, suddenly here are highlighted, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
So I think that's the distinction to make for those who are wondering. So that's quite important. Well, it's one of those things where you just have to go out and do it. Just
yeah, and just play around with it
and play around with it. I think,
and it's not hard either. It's not, I mean, it looks technical, but it's actually not hard. It's, you just click a button and the map comes up and you just read it, and you're just purely looking at angles. You know, that's the start of looking at ACG. It's really quite simple. It's, you know, baby steps, and you can just see it for what it is. It's nothing in depth at that time. You know, you can go deeper later, but yeah, and you can have fun with it. Yeah.
Well, I think it would be actually a really good idea if you are interested in learning more to contact the Astrology Lodge and find out how you can get a recording of Wendy's course.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
would be.
exactly. Brilliant. Thank you. Yes.
And if people wanted to find out more about your work, Wendy, and get in touch with you, how do they do that?
They can just go onto my website, wendystacey.com.
Great.
They can do that. Yeah, and you know, the Mayo School as well. That's also
Well, I will make sure to put a link to that in the description box. Wendy,
cool.
thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, and thank you so much. Take care and have a great day. Cool.
Then do remember that there are lots of things that you can do to help yourselves with astrology. One of them is, of course, looking at my own website and finding out what courses I'm doing. Until next time, goodbye.